When we speak of Dogen and Dogen's writings, we usually speak about Shobogenzo, which is so big and goes in so many different directions. And sometimes we talk about his monastic codes, his instructions um, for monastic practice. But we rarely talk about, or I rarely talk about, his collection of koans. These aren't ones that he created, but he compiled 300 koans and he wrote commentaries on them. And there's some debate, healthy debate, I think, about how he understood koan study in his time, what it meant for him, and I won't get into that. What I can say is that in this tradition, in the Soto tradition, koans have been used, at least for a long time now, as a kind of platform for conversation. So not in the way that we often hear about koans in terms of a student receiving the koan from the teacher and then going and chewing on it and coming back and presenting an answer. Instead, it's literally koan means public case. They're used as public cases. We hold them up and we just kind of examine them from different angles. So I don't do it very often, but tonight I wanted to hold up one. This is the second in his collection of koans, and the title is Baizhang Remains Seated. Here it is. Here's the main case. Zen master Xiyun of Mount Huangbo asked his teacher, Baizhang, how can we explain the teaching that has been handed down? Baizhang remained seated in silence. Huangbo said, if so, what will people in the future receive? And Baizhang said, they will say that you are a true person. He then returned to the abbot's room. He left. So Huangbo goes to Baizhang, the student goes to the teacher and says, how can we explain the Buddha Dharma? How can we explain these teachings to others? The ones that we've received. And the teacher just sits there, totally still, totally silent. And then the student says, but if we do that, what will they get? And the teacher says, they'll know that you're a true person. And that's the end of that. There are lots of ways to approach something like this. And perhaps the most popular that I've heard is to take Baizhang's silent sitting as a message that it's all about Zazen, right? That he just does Zazen as kind of performance to say, the way that we will share what's been handed down is we'll teach Zazen or we'll do Zazen, right? That's it. That's all you need. It's kind of a beautiful way to read it. But it also, to me, feels reductive. It feels small. In part because we don't actually know if he did Zazen in this moment. We just know he didn't say anything. He just sat there. Dogen writes a commentary on this, as he does for all the koans. And he writes, Baizhang's response to Huangbo's question is neither here nor there. If you take it as not responding, or remaining seated, or silently answering, you've missed Baizhang's teaching. So we can't take it as a non-response, according to Dogen. We can't take it as doing nothing. And we can't take it as somehow saying it, but with his mouth closed. So what is this? The reason I chose this koan to talk about, the reason that this one speaks to me, is because I think about this question all the time. How can we explain the teaching that has been handed down? I went to Japan. I trained in monasteries that were 600 years old. I trained in a way that was the way my teacher trained, and the way my teacher's teacher trained, and the way his teacher trained. And in one way, I can say that I received a lot. I came back with these full suitcases of information. How to do this? Why? This teaching and that teaching and that teaching. And so I've had many days, many periods along the way of kind of looking at it all laid out in front of me and thinking, what do I do with this? A lot of it doesn't seem to translate. Or a lot of it is taught in the context of 24-hour a day, 365 days a year practice. And so how do we do that on Tuesday night? How do I even bring it up? So when I'm in that space, when I'm in one of those periods, it can feel like a problem. And sometimes I speak with other teachers, and we all kind of share this problem. We ponder it. Sometimes we can hold it lightly, and sometimes it makes us sweat a little bit. What if someone handed something to me and I don't know how to hand it off to someone else? Maybe what if this is where it stops? What was the point? It's a serious question, especially for a tradition like this one that goes back so far and in its origins points back even further. Always staking this claim as being a practice, a set of practices, a set of teachings that's upholding something that comes from the beginning. This story is 1,000 years old, and Huangbo, 1,000 years ago, already has this concern. He already has this question. We're receiving something, but how do we pass it on? It's a very sincere question. I don't know what he expects his teacher to say. But his teacher says nothing. He just sits there. What do we do? There's no definitive way to read this encounter, but I'll offer some of the ways it's spoken to me on different days. One is that Baizhang is saying that we pass it on without explaining, right? The question is, how do we explain the teaching? So he takes the explaining out. This verbal mess. And what we're left with is the idea that whatever is going to be handed on, it's going to be handed on with our bodies. It's going to be something that we show, something that we do, something that is seen, something that's felt. That's one. Another way to read this is to read that Baizhang just feels a deep trust. He's not worried about it. Not worried about something being properly explained or properly handed down or properly received. He trusts in the Dharma. And so while Huangbo is moving around and trying to solve a problem, Baizhang can just stay still. Another way to read this is that Baizhang, as the teacher, trusts Huangbo as the student. Huangbo comes to him with this question that is real for every single person who has ever tried to teach this, and says, tell me how. And instead of taking that away from him, instead of saying, you do it just like this, Baizhang keeps his mouth shut, trusting his student to know what to do, to know what to say, to know what to show, without any interference from him. All of these ways of reading it at different times have encouraged me and challenged me. And I'll add, there's this last line that we shouldn't ignore. Huangbo asks, if we do that, then what will people in the future receive? And Baizhang said, they will say that you are a true person. And a true person is, usually it's a longer phrase, the true person of no rank. This is the highest compliment in the Zen world, that someone was a true person of no rank. But another way to understand a true person of no rank is a true person without ambition. A true person without ambition is someone who is not trying to reach a particular goal. A person who's not trying to reach a particular goal is someone who is not trying to control outcomes. And someone who's not trying to control outcomes is someone who is not trying to control this moment. The question comes from a place of control. The question comes from a place of concern, of needing to solve a problem. It's not just how do I teach it, it's how do I make sure that it's been taught. How do I make sure that they get it? But the true person here isn't trying to control what is seen and what is heard and what is felt. This applies to everything. Here is this rarefied conversation about how we preserve or cultivate or nurture Zen. But it's also about how you have relationships. It's about how you raise children. It's about how you vote. It's about how you fall in love. It's about anything that sparks that question in you of, how do I make sure that this works out just right? When Huangbo asked that question, and he was probably sitting on this question for a while, on one level he's met with nothing. But in another way, I think he's met with a full response. But it's one that looks like this instead of looking like this. I need to remember that. And that's where I'll stop for today.